Stop the Week with Robert Robinson.
Hello, our conversation this evening comes from Sarah Harrison, the author, Stephen Oliver, the composer, Benny Green, writer and broadcaster, and Nicholas Tucker, lecturer in psychology at Sussex University. And we have music from Dillie Keane of Fascinating Aida. Now, just before we really begin, we're just knocking up when we're thinking about this. Are you as mystified as I am by the word reshuffle? I mean, by the way, it's assumed to be axiomatic that a reshuffle magically renews the appeal of a government. The faces are exactly the same, they're simply changed round a bit, and lo, any slight misgivings the electorate may have had about the government's competence are magically dispelled, and there's dancing in the streets. Now, I'm asking you because I just wondered if I was the only one to find this incomprehensible.
Oh, no, it's a mark of melancholy world weariness, a reshuffle. I've always thought there was something quixotic about politicians, but I've thought up to now that it was to do with the fact that they live in a world wholly inhabited by fantasy, but not at all. The other part of Don Quixote is this this melancholy world weary feeling he has about anything. The most sensible reshuffling a cabinet is in response to a disaster is to enact one of the most sensible remarks in the book. When Don Quixote goes to hell, he sees a man bleeding without a heart on a table, and his friend, the man's friend, is saying to him, "What should we do? What should we do? No one can save you but Don Quixote de la Mancha, and he's far, far away." And the man says, "Well, that's the way the cookie crumbles," he says. "Patience, cousin," he says, "and shuffle the cards."
It simply is this feeling that although we can't do much, what we can do is change the characters. The stories go on the same way.
You actually believe in that,
Well, yes, because, I mean, to give you the most, the dramatic example, I'd have thought, is when Churchill was called in 1940, and there was a low cartoon saying, "All behind you, Winston," and everybody was marching along in their shirt sleeves. And I think that was the case where actually changing one person for another did work. I think just for a day, seeing Kenneth Baker's beaming face and his wife beaming behind him, and
well, that's all very well if you can distinguish.
Something might be happening.
If you're in the happy position of being able to distinguish Kenneth Baker from Kenneth Clarke, and Kenneth Clarke from Alan Clarke, and no, you can't have either of three, but any one of three from all those Normans. I mean, they all look... Actually, Kenneth, if I got the right one, the one who's just now been shuffled or reshuffled, he's got that brill cream haircut, hasn't he? And that, but he still wears the same smirk he wore when he was at the Ministry of Aggravation and Fisheries, or wherever it was, now that he is in the Great Beachcombers Ministry of Bubble Blowing.
Anybody that's comforted by Kenneth Baker's face, I mean, you could be comforted by his intellect, possibly, although I'm not. If you were comforted by his face, there's probably something wrong with you.
Sarah.
I can't quite say why a reshuffle works, but I can testify to its effectiveness because I used to work on a woman's magazine, and the stock in trade of the Hags Mag is the reshuffle. There are, after all, as you only know, 6 basic components to life, and they are cookery, fashion, home, sex, knitting, and fiction. And our lives are made up of these vital elements, but there's only so many things you can say about them. Now, the skill of the reshuffle finds its apotheosis in something that the Hags Mag used to call the mix and match wardrobe, which I think is what Mrs. Thatcher is at. And it comprises typically an old trousers, a shirt, a belt, a hat, and an old tablecloth, none of them in themselves in the least remarkable, but capable, says the fashion editor, that is to say Mrs. Thatcher, of creating endless dazzling effects when assembled and reassembled in certain ways. And also, of course, that favourite cookery headline, which I remember, 30 ways with mince. Now, whatever... Mince is mince, and by any other name, it still tastes like either unreconstructed papier-mâché or stewed ball bearings, whatever you like to say. But the fact is that reshuffling is effective. It does make people think they're getting something different, and they like it. It's comforting to see a few of the same things there.
Has it occurred to anybody that these things have their reverse as well? There's such a thing, there's a facelift in the cabinet. They have face drops as well. And I remember when Keith Joseph was first appointed Education Minister, somebody said that to me. Oh, the government's administering a face drop. And he really, of course, does look doomy. And the same happened with Michael Foot. I mean, I think that his physical appearance lost him a lot of votes. He was unable to express joy at whatever the contingency, he couldn't express joy facially. So that, I think, was a disastrous thing. That he literally needed a facelift. Yeah, and then the Labour Party would have got a lot more votes. Wouldn't really give us the policy, but...
I think that's quite right. I think that's why these changes are often called cosmetic. that you do see different faces there. Now, I've got no brief for Kenneth Baker's face at all, but all I'm saying
come on, let
is
someone say something nice about the man's face.
When you get new politicians getting new jobs, just for 1 or 2 days, the smirk broadens into a genuine smile. And against all reason, Benny, you do feel something of that person's pleasure.
I wonder a little if they've taken fully into account the awful, unglamorous nature of the word reshuffle. I mean, shuffle's bad enough. I mean, it sounds like carpet slippers, doesn't it, going up and down? But reshuffle seems to add one of those plaid dressing gowns to the carpet slipper. And you hear some poor stooped old gentleman, certainly not Mr. Kenneth, whatever his name is, going up and down the dusty corridors of Whitehall. But, well, we just sort of scratched the surface there, came through the other side. I don't think there's much more than the surface to scratch. But now, here we get a bit serious, because it didn't come as any surprise to me to hear that 5,000 million pots of yoghurt were consumed between Michaelmas and Lammastide. And the appetite, as you well know, for yoghurt is uncontainable. You see crowds outside Sainsbury's hardly able to wait for the lorries to unload the stuff, fresh from the yoghurt vats of Albania. Cows play some part in its manufacture, they tell me. Not the hooves, I think, since they're used for glue. And little did Otto the corpulent second chef realise what an uncontrollable force he was releasing as he magimixed the first consignment that quiet Sunday in faraway Transylvania. Of course, the secret ingredient was invisible. It was goodness. When Otto the Corpulent gave up drinking the blood of virgins and took to yoghurt, he became Otto the Slender, Otto the Good, because, as we know, only very, very lovely people eat yoghurt. They become instantly pure as their lips touch the carton. But speaking for the impure backlash, I say it tastes of sour cream, and I say the hell with it. Where do the rest of you stand, yoghurt-wise?
Well, it does taste of sour cream. That's why they put all the flavourings in it, to disguise its real taste. It became popular the day they started to pollute it with strawberries and apricots and passion fruit. And then the minute they started to pollute the purity, it became popular. Before that, it was something everybody was frightened of because they couldn't spell it. And
or they couldn't pronounce it because a friend of mine said, is it yogurt, as in Solihull? I said, well, you want to say Solihull, but it really is Solihull, if you can bring yourself to utter the word. Yeah. Well, I'm sure it's yoghurt, isn't it? Not yogurt.
Well, I always say yoghurt. The thing is, until it got glamorised, and it has been glamorised now, people associated it with Ukrainian peasants who lived to be 143. Or either that, or it seemed like 143. How much truth there was in all that stuff, I don't know. But the pure yoghurt was supposed to induce longevity. But the stuff that's on the market, I don't suppose, got too much resemblance to.
Well,
to the
would
real
you know,
thing.
though? Are you in a position to know?
Well, have you ever tasted the real yoghurt that you grow? That it grows.
Oh dear, that's one of those questions like, have you ever eaten a real potato? It's something
it's like
totally unanswerable.
It's like Quatermash. You eat about 3 cupfuls of it, and tomorrow morning you come down, there's more of it.
Yes.
And and you can't keep pace with it.
I've not only tasted it, I've actually grown it. And it's
you grow it, huh?
Well, if you put it in a warm wardrobe.
That's right. Yeah.
But see, Bob,
he's got 4 wardrobes.
You're just trying to pull
Benny is absolutely right.
You think I believe that, don't you?
You really must distinguish between yoghurt and yogurt, as it were. Now, the real stuff, as Benny said, is whey-faced and white. It's a Puritan objection to all junk sweetness. It's right. Made in airing cupboards, wardrobes, in old sort of pots, and you have to sort of pour off this awful sort of colourless liquid from the top. And then, as you say, Bob, you sort of have pure health. And we all know that pure health is a good thing to have. It doesn't actually taste very nice.
No idea it was grown in wardrobes
I find
in
myself
Sussex.
thoroughly resenting this whole attitude of superiority of Berry and Nicholas here about
I love yoghurt.
That's what I really hate.
I love it, but I don't think it does you any good.
I'm prepared to be a lion with yoghurt.
There must be something wrong with you.
The thing is,
doing you good. I can imagine if you think it's a magic.
But I'd like to take up your point about Quatermass, because it seems to me that the real Quatermass is junket. I mean, junket is something where you put the spoon in, take it out, and the material silently closes the wound.
I just hope no one is eating a nice high tea while listening to these words.
But has anyone else noticed, though, the fury that one does get into when you find someone else being superior about a food? I used to live in Munich, and my landlady there would never drink milk until it was at least 3 or 4 days old, until, to my taste, it had completely gone off. And she was revolted by my idea of drinking this sweet, fresh stuff. And before we'd finished discussing this matter, we were on to the Versailles Treaty and whether the Germans should have crossed the Rhine in 1920. It was absolutely infuriating social act for both of us.
I don't know what all this stuff Nicholas is about the warm wardrobe and so on. For goodness sake, Nick, have you never been into Boots, the high street chemist? They sell horrid little plastic and chrome machines for making yoghurt. Making yoghurt is a very middle-class, upwardly mobile activity now, and all you do is put a tiny teaspoonful of sour milk into a little carton.
Sour milk?
Yes, but it doesn't taste like that in the end, because then you add other things to it. But that's the whole...
taste away.
I'll tell you what it is. It's because it's become a very okay food for babies. Suddenly, everybody's discovered this sweet, sloppy, acceptable food that you can feed an infant, which is sweet and they love, and which they can swallow, but which is also supposedly good for them, and which is okay to have standing on the side, unlike all those awful sort of proprietary bottles of very sugar-sweetened prunes and custard and things.
Well,
so it goes on up from there. But they don't bear no relation to the real thing.
I mean, I'm against it. I mean, when Stephen mentioned sour, I mean, the German lady wouldn't drink it until it was sour. And you just said sour cream, like my friend in East Molesey, who drinks an awful lot of it, he tells me. The idea repels me, but I think it's because it's something to do with white, runny stuff in pots or on plates. My mother used to... my childhood seemed to be dotted with my mother saying, eat it up, on the grounds that it tasted like something else. You know, blancmange tasted like ice cream, and custard tasted like cream, and I knew it was a fib. No,
I think it's a much more atavistic horror you're displaying. Absolutely. No. It's like people who can't eat meat because it reminds them of their own bodies.
If it had
walls, it's the curse of Atreus.
If it had the name Walls or El Dorado on it, I knew it was the real thing. But why my mother tried to pass off things that tasted of custard as tasting of something else, I don't know. So I was suspicious. Yeah, it may well be even more atavistic than simply going back to my mother.
It's very sad.
I didn't marry my mother, by the way.
I think you simply just don't like the stuff. And all of us have certain foods we can't take. But, Bob, the mistake you're making, I think it's a mistake that, like Stephen's ex-landlady, people always make about food. I'm just reading a bit of George Orwell the other day, who's renowned, as we all know, as a sort of saint and the one
he's neurotic
clear-headed
about food.
Man.
He's always gone about the smells.
Always going on about food, cranks. And he said in one passage, one sometimes gets the impression that the mere words socialism or communism draw towards them with magnetic force every fruit juice drinker, nudist, sandal wearer, sex maniac, Quaker, nature quack, pacifist and feminist in England. Now, the only thing he left out there was yogurt drinker, because he just couldn't believe that things that he thought were ridiculous could actually be like
Marjorie got it fairly right about tripe, in Wigan Pier, when he said, they hauled it out of a coal shed, and it had thumbprints, dirty black oh dear, I won't go on, because it is high tea time after all. But you're going to say, Benny.
The sad thing is that all the people listening in who drink or eat yogurt because they think it does them good are wasting their time. If they like the taste, that's fine. But I remind them of Woody Allen's remark about the couple at Health Food, and one of them died, and he said he can't be dead. He used to eat health food. And it's the same with yogurt. People do eventually...
Well, there are other substances. I mean, Nicholas was saying, this friend of mine in East Molesey, he said, because I haven't eaten yogurt, not knowingly, I have to admit to having probably had it with mint added in Indian restaurants. But it's masked by the flavours of the other foodstuffs. But the man in East Molesey said to me, how do you know you don't like it? You sound just like my mother. You haven't tried it. And I said, well, how do you think people who know they don't like oysters or mussels know? Because they've never tasted it. But I will say this for my friend, he's a very adventurous eater. And once when he was kind enough to take me to a Hungarian restaurant, what I ordered, I quite forgot, but I know what he ordered. And that was a plate of stewed cow's lung in sour cream. Now, in a funny sort of way, I'm repelled by the sour cream element, let alone the cow's lung. But I have a sneaking feeling that my friend was being awfully grown up and I was being the whimpering, finicky child. As I whimpered, I made little noises of abhorrence as he ate it.
The thing about children's dislikes...
I'm rather ashamed of it.
It seems to me that, this thing about you not liking yoghurt, I don't understand that, because it no longer looks disgusting or as if it's got anything nasty in it. You're just sort of carrying on this prejudice about it, in spite of the evidence that's in front of you. It seems to me there are three things that really disgust us. One is, I think, consistencies, things like that boiled marrow with those little sort of fibery whiskers sticking out of it, and as you say, tripe, all kinds of fat, that nasty layer of subcutaneous slime which British hotels manage always to get underneath a nice crisp skin of duck. Anything that shouldn't be there is another thing, like green fly slugs, ants, hairs, preferably long and straight and not curly, and nasty little bits in boiled eggs which suddenly remind you where they came from.
Oh dear,
you're
right.
Do you know the thing of tubes in meat?
Yes.
And the other thing is, particularly with meat, that it looks too much like what it is. Have you ever seen those little frog's legs joined together that you get in France? The little leaping frog's legs with a little pelvis at the top? And the small tongues. Large tongues, okay, because you roll it up, you press it in a saucepan and you slice it. But little tongues are little tongues.
Our discomfort. I think that's the most revolting thing, what you've just said. It
Well,
seems
it is,
absolutely
it
hideous.
I'm
Excuse me, ignorance is bliss on this. I remember the same lady in Germany who gave me a thick white soup, which I enjoyed with enormous pleasure, and it was obviously her way of getting her own back, because she told me what it was, and I didn't know the German word for what she'd said, so I went up to my bedroom, looked up the word, and it was brains, and immediately I was copiously...
Ah, yes, but whose?
Well, precisely. That's what I'm saying, you see. I think it's it's an anthropomorphic fear, isn't it?
The thing that worries me is mushrooms. It's not that in themselves they don't repel me, but I'm very suspicious of their resemblance to toadstools, and I'm always worried that I'm going to eat the wrong thing. And I invented at one time a vegetarian form of Russian roulette, which is a plate of mushrooms and one of them's a toadstool. and that is the reason why I refuse to eat mushrooms, just in case I pick the wrong
You
one.
were just trying to put yourself...
Well,
I did know a girl who wouldn't eat mussels on the ground that they looked like other people's belly buttons. And once you perhaps I should...
Yes, they do.
But to come back to the atavistic primeval horror of eating the insides of cows and everything, I don't feel like eating offal, whether it be liver or kidneys, all the pancreases, things like that. You imagine putting them in the frying pan and them sputtering away, and you can fantasize that they're suddenly going to jump out and start digesting you, not the other way round. But this really is a fantasy. If I will eat a slice off a cow's backside, why won't I eat whatever is within?
Well, you see, Bob, to say it's a fantasy, it isn't to explain it at all away, because fantasies are what really matter in the whole food business. That there's been a famous film made for children in America about Eskimos, about their whole ecology, and a tremendous amount of money put into this film. It's called Man, so you can really understand yourself by looking at another culture. And the whole project was aborted because there's a scene where these Eskimos were seen eating seals' eyes. And although that makes good sense in an economy, it made good nutritious sense, good anthropological sense, good ecological sense, no one could actually bear watching them do it. Now, there's no real reason why it's worse to eat an eye than to eat, as you said, a slice of a backside. But we're in a world of enormous feeling here. There's nothing much we can do about it.
Well, having ruined everyone's high tea, I think we'll now have a song and try and take their minds off it all. It's Dillie Keane who's going to sing, and of course, you know what it's called, Social Eating.
What makes us successful? Envied by our peers. We're the darlings of the squash club, and we've both got good careers. But it's not our habitat sofa, nor our long weekends in Rome. No, it's just that we've realized that upward mobility starts at home. We've got a walk and a Magimix too, and cookbooks written by the brothers Rue. We're young and upwardly mobile. Our midday snack is carrot juice. We've learned to make carob mousse. We're young and upwardly mobile. Pre-cooked food and takeaways, we hate those, unless they're bought at M&S and Waitrose. With homemade pasta, life's divine. Do have a glass of dry white wine, 'cause we're young and upwardly mobile. He's got a BMW, I drive a cabriolet. We windsurf every fortnight and go running every day. Our social life is buzzing. Together we're a winner. But this counts as naught unless you get it right when people come to dinner. Our guests arrive no fewer than 6 for a glass of Kier and Bombay mix. They're young, and like us, they're yuppies. We start the meal with tabbouleh, taramasalata, c'est passé, and not for the likes of us yuppies. Our sushi served with chopsticks and with sake, followed up by chicken teriyaki. Be sure to serve celeriac, and you will be invited back by your friends, your equals, the yuppies. Enhance the glory of your food. James Galway softly sets the mood for the young and upwardly mobile. Next, it's time to serve the cheese before dessert. Be ought to please the young and upwardly mobile. The stigma of fruit salad lessens somewhat if made with mangoes, kiwi fruit, and kumquat. Kenyan coffee and sweeties too. Only Bendix bitter mince will do for the young and upwardly mobile. And when it's all over, pray your food with approval meets, 'cause we judge a man by what he eats. Yes, we're young and upwardly mobile.
Bravo. There it was, social eating, and it was sung there by Dillie Keane. Another little current topic, Chelsea Flower Show. I really don't think Chelsea Flower Show is the way to look at flowers. Because if you go, I didn't go this year. I once went, but I haven't gone this year. But you see rows and rows of the flowers bursting with anabolic steroids, or even reminding you of Strasbourg geese, force-fed on Tonksi's mixture, or cars that have been newly sprayed. I apologise for the metaphors. Once you start, they spread like weeds. All I'm saying is that plants at Chelsea don't look like plants you see in gardens. In gardens, the plants look fairly outdoor, but the plants at Chelsea look like people who get their tans under sun lamps. Sorry, the bindweed's growing over the words. And as far as bindweed's concerned, it's not the same as couch grass, is it? I don't think it is. Well, bindweed seems the right name for pretty well everything you don't want in a garden. Sometimes I look at the bindweed and I give it 2 fingers. Sometimes I threaten to concrete it over. And sometimes I go for it so obsessionally you'd think I was doing it for a bet. No weeds at Chelsea, of course, with the exception of those grown in bowls by people who are determined to annoy. But weedless or weed-ridden, I wish I could just develop the right kind of gardener's temperament, which jogs along at nature's tempo and neither insists on perfection nor simply gives up. How does it take the rest of you?
I think you are conflating 2 quite different sorts of gardener.
You always say something like that.
No, but I really would back myself 100% this time. There's one sort of gardener who can live with the garden, and as they get old, they let the garden gradually take over, and so you get a nice old couple living in a virtual domestic jungle, perfectly happily. The other sort are the ones who see nature not as basically self-regulating as benign, but incredibly encroaching, dangerous, rather like the Czechoslovaks felt about the Nazis in 1937. And they actually will leave a perfectly nice house because they say the garden is getting too much for them, as if they just can't risk staying too close to this
you can understand it, though.
I don't think you paint
but
at all
they're 2
an accurate
different
position.
people.
Well, possibly. Oh, yes.
At all. I wrote a little opera called The Garden once. It was a sort of detective story in which the villain turned out to be the garden itself. And I can't help feeling that that's actually the view that most gardeners have of gardens. They're absolutely ruthless people. I don't know whether you know any gardeners, but they have no shame at all when confronted with nature. A slight shift of the kaleidoscope of history and they would be Napoleon marching on Moscow. It's exactly the same impetus. I don't know whether to admire this ruthless destruction of nature's works or not, but it's certainly true that gardeners are like that.
But Stephen, you see, what we're doing like every other animal when we create our garden is we're actually sprinting. We're proclaiming our territory. See, I hope you understand the term. Because it wouldn't actually be legal and decent to go and do it. So what we do, it is exactly what cats do, Nicholas. S-P-R-E-I-N-T-I-N-G. But we couldn't actually get away with that. So what we have to do is go and put up a fence, mow our lawn and trim our edges. Now, most people are great destructive gardeners, and I'm really into this. I'm not immune to the general urge, but it's mainly in the shape of ripping, clipping and stripping. I have the most awful trouble trouble actually replacing all that destruction with anything else. Now, I am aided and abetted by an amanuensis called Bruno, who comes to help me in the garden once a week. And he and I, between us, subdue Mother Nature with a vengeance. But, oh boy, do we have difficulty getting any flowers to grow. Because if I put them in, and here I must admit to being addicted to those wonderful catalogues they send you in February, which say, if you send us £4.75, you can then have the perfect herbaceous border. It will be a riot of colour and the envy of your neighbours. And I send away my £4.75 and I get these little polythene bags full of mud, which arrive 6 weeks later. I put them in, and then Bruno arrives on Friday and he digs them all up. And that's the sort of relationship we have. We're two alike. You're right, it's not the garden that's a villain, it's actually the gardener, whether it be employer or employee, I regret to say.
I don't know what all the fuss is about. I've got a garden, and I don't do any gardening because I can't tell one thing in it from another. I don't think it matters. I like it fairly unkempt. I don't really like to see a garden so kempt that you can't walk on it. And I don't think that all weeds look ugly. I mean, I agree with Bob about buying weed. There should be a law against it. But a lot of weeds look rather nice. And I don't mind if they stick there and grow and push everything else out. It doesn't really matter. I like the garden to be a mess. I once tried, against my will, to cope with it all. And we put some cucumbers in the greenhouse, and I was deputed to look after these 2 cucumber plants, and I would water them every evening. And it wasn't till the end of August that it turned out that I'd been watering a weed. Which weed was it? It looked like was it a marigold? No, not a marigold. But I've been sedulously watering a weed for 3 months. And after that, I gave up gardening completely.
Well, you have to, I think you have to draw a line. Whoever this Bruno is, he sounds like someone out of a Wagner opera, or Albericht or something, or, stumping up and down and shouting.
Culpability Brown, actually.
I love it.
Nice one.
Say it again.
Well, it's just Culpability Brown seems a good summary of a man who interferes too much with the landscape.
Absolutely.
Culpability Bruno, yes, but you were translating. But the thing is, you have to go in between. If you start to go counter to the impulses of the universe, of nature herself, you'll get nowhere indeed. You may invite a thunderbolt. But if you're to have a garden at all, well, there has to be a little arrangement. That is to say, the grass has got to be in one place and some of the plants in another. So you have to cultivate that. But what you have to avoid, it seems to me, I don't know whether you and your chum do this, is you must avoid seeming to want to manicure the universe. That's what you must seem to want to do. Avoid doing, I should say. I mean, it reminds me of the people Nicholas is speaking about. They're frightened not of the garden. They're frightened of what lies behind the garden fence. All those impulses jumping out of old stunted oak trees and charging over the garden. The garden being too much for us is simply saying the universe is too much for us. But there is a line to be drawn. It needn't be the one thing or the other.
I think so. I think, people who say you're nearer to a god in a garden than anywhere else on earth is absolutely true. You're absolutely faced with omnipotence, and I can't imagine anything more frightful. You cannot win in a garden. Consequently, how touching, how agreeable are those window boxes in London streets, because they're doing exactly the converse of what you're describing. They're doing precisely against the ubiquitousness of tarmac and concrete. They are placing a little gesture of arrogance. And
you see, there's a spirit in which you do, let us say, the weeding. If you do it in the spirit which seems to feel or suggest that the weeds shouldn't exist, be sure the thunderbolt will follow. Yes. Saturn, or whoever's the suitable god, will jump out of the riven oak tree and do for you. But if you are content simply to weed a bit and know that they'll always be there, that's another way of doing it.
You're really placating the panic god.
Indeed.
Bob, you really can't get away with this. You're like Lady Catherine de Bourgh. What you really want is an odd, little, pretty sort of wilderness.
I'll allow you to say that.
Bob is absolutely right.
Thank you, Nick.
No,
silence the rest of us.
He's so right, it's worth making a point of it, that there is no way, apparently, you can get rid of weeds. So any poor gardener who goes out saying, I'm going to do the weeding today, I'm going to do it properly, is doomed to a life of disappointment, neurosis, anxiety, trips to the shops. It's merely a case of coexistence. We can do some things to gardens, and gardens are going to do some things to us. And if you want a happy life, you're very, very free in actually
I would like to
establishing
return the
elevation.
compliment. I never heard a truer word spoken. I haven't. Well done,
Nicholas, I read somewhere that one of the gardeners who was talking about weeds, I read that he said that if you took a lot of our common or garden weeds and actually put it in a pot and tried to cultivate it, that it proved to be rather a delicate plant, that it needed a lot of looking after. Well, this came as no surprise to me, because of course, they're not daft. They know when they're well off. I mean, if you went out in the street tomorrow and you took in the largest, most tattooed, most brutalised skinhead you could find and injected him with the common cold, he would take to his bed, call for his mummy and proclaim that he was dying. Now, the same thing with a weed. Why should it not, for heaven's sake, realise when it's put in a pot, fed and watered and put in sheltered accommodation, it's onto a good thing? But when it sees Bruno and I tramping around, swallowing Valium by the handful, it knows that if I go away from my holiday, it is going to confer under the surface of the ground and shoot up in the form of 3-foot-high thistles during my absence and take over all the little things.
You
I've
really
got in
do
the
think
garden
it's
centre.
war, don't you?
I do think it's war, I'm afraid.
It isn't.
What about, have you considered talking to the weeds? Because I'm told that there are lots of people who talk to the flowers and get some sense out of them. I mean, could you reason with the weeds? Now, look, fellas, why don't you just buzz off? I mean, it might work. I understand that flowers are very conducive to good conversation. I can't believe this, but I'm told it's so.
I don't think they and I
but you
talk the
see,
same language.
You can't talk to weeds because they never stop talking to you, by which I mean they are a sort of murmurous background. You know, it's like the old lady in the stalls who you've got a bit of Beethoven or Hamlet going on, or even Ladies' Night in the Turkish Bath, and you want to concentrate, and someone is buzzing and chunnering and growling away in the back. That's weeds.
But
so
what-
don't try and talk to them. They won't listen.
But during the war, when there were bombed out sites and there was a lot of rubble, there used to be a weed that grew profusely on coal heaps and rubble heaps, and it's the only proper name for any flower that I know, and it was called coltsfoot. And it was a little yellow flower, and this is the sum total of my horticultural knowledge, by the way. And I thought, what a great little thing. It grows among all this muck, and nobody tends it, nobody waters it. There it is. It's making the coal heaps look a little bit better. And it was a weed. Now, according to the Blue Book of Gardening, we should have torn it out.
Well,
It was
no,
good.
but then that's the thin end of the wedge, isn't it? You see, the real gardener fears and dreads that happening. I mean, it's all right happening on coal, but when it happens in soil, you've got your whole house overrun with coals.
No,
It looked nice.
That's
It looked
not
okay.
true.
The more threatening the world becomes, the more we destroy our natural environment, so we wish to create what you've just said about Nick's garden, our own little Arcadia. I think it's rather touching. We are fighting it. We are careless and profligate with all nature's goodies outside where we drive our cars and drop our litter, but we do still, and jolly good for the human spirit, want to create our little paradise at home, and I think that's rather nice.
I think that's what I meant about London window boxes. I thoroughly feel that about
Yes.
them. Even those
It's a nice
dreadful
impulse.
hotel chains that hire people to come and put exactly the same coloured window box in every place. Nevertheless, it's a gesture in the right
impulse.
spirit.
Yeah.
Sounds a bit Pollyanna. Surely someone's going to enter
very
a...
nice people here.
Yeah.
It is not really relevant, except that there is such a thing as a horticultural disaster. At Lord's, they have little banks of flowers at the back of the ground where they grow tulips, which come up at the beginning of the season in the colours of the MCC, which are, I know, it's
A rather wanton act.
Well, yes, well, the thing is that they come up in sort of yellow and orange tulips, and they look rather splendid, and it's like the grass is wearing a club tie. And I walked there one May and saw a dark red tulip. Something had gone wrong, and I just wondered which of the rival county clubs had planted this vagrant tulip, and it spoilt the effect of the bank. So there again, you see, it's hubris. It's pride having a fall with the wrong colour tulip.
Well, I think that's right. I think if you're going to design nature into shapes entirely made by man, I think you deserve to have red tulips stuck in the middle of them. Right.
Sarah Harrison, Benny Green, Nicholas Tucker and Stephen Oliver were stopping the week with Robert Robinson. Dillie Keane of Fascinating Aida provided the musical interlude, and the programme was produced by Michael Ember.